Thank you. I'm David Word. I'm an engineer with Joe Tanner and Associates. Congratulate you on a great first draft. It's very, very good. I think you've done a superb job. I have some very minor polishing comments that I'll give to Jan and email that ain't worth discussion right here. Just two comments. One comment is about the span the marsh. I found that EPD can get in a lot of trouble by changing a definition that's right out of statute, passed by the General Assembly with no dissenting votes, signed by the governor, and you change that, which is right, EPD or the governor or the General Assembly. So think about that carefully. The second one is, I think you need some work, and probably the stakeholders need to help, in terms of what Jack pointed out under the variance by rule. It says to identify certain category of activities that are covered by the variance. The rule doesn't provide a list of activities that could be covered by the variance. It provides information to be submitted, but it doesn't provide the categories. So I think you should come up with the categories, or if not, if you're going to review that information and say yes or no in 14 days, it would be fair to have the criteria by which you're going to review those information in the rule. And I think that's work in progress that you ought to get a lot of people's help on. But good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Final comment? Okay, right. Another one here.
I'm Roger Lloyd, Satilla River Keeper Alliance. And my question is, how does this 101 apply itself to the LCP disaster that we have here in Brunswick? Will it be able to implement the things that it wants to do with the work that's going to be done to cover up and get rid of the pollutants?
I'm looking at my colleagues here to see if anything they want to jump up and say. We might need to talk a little further to ensure that I understand the full context of your question. The statute that was passed, has provisions in it for if you're going to intrude upon that buffer for the marsh, what you have to do. Or in some cases, you can't do it because you don't have a criteria that would pass. So to the extent that the people that are involved in that cleanup need to do that, they would be subject to those provisions. The act in and of itself isn't doing anything with that site, but I'm not clear from your question if that's what you're asking.
The word variance was particularly a bother here. Because there's going to be some serious work, and there's some serious pollutants.
Right, so the variance just means there is a buffer that is protected, and there are some criteria that are authorized to intrude upon that buffer, and those activities are either exempt in the statute or subject to a regulatory process by which EPD can grant a variance from that buffer as part of the regulatory process. So the variance term just comes straight out of the statute.
Roger Raines with City of Savannah, Stormwater Director. My question has to do with ditches that terminate in a salt marsh. And it's always been our understanding, at least in the last 20 years, we can't go in that marsh and do any maintenance on a ditch. But I think I heard from the description here something different from what we were operating under currently, is that I couldn't, under my understanding, maintain the last 25 feet of the ditch before it entered the marsh due to the buffer requirements. But now, due to a definition, I can go in that last 25 feet. Was that your intent, is my first question? Second is, did I misunderstand something?
Thank you.
Just to start off on that.
Just to clarify from a coastal marshes protection standpoint, which obviously is where CRD will be looking and be involved in this. Ditches, because coastal marshlands is jurisdiction can include any man-created connection to it. It's just not naturally. Okay. So in some cases, our jurisdiction might go up to what is a ditch per se, and so our jurisdiction might not be right where the vegetated marsh or an open marsh area may be. Our jurisdiction might go up to some of these jurisdictional ditches, and then I think that's when y'all's rules will apply from that point on.
Yeah, CRD would give us a JD line as far up the ditch as they take jurisdiction. Once they no longer take jurisdiction of the ditch, then at that point we measure the buffer from the point of rest of vegetation like we do with any upland place. So activities in the buffer would still be regulated by us either from the JD line or the point of rest of vegetation.
Paul Andrews, Glenn County Engineering, we're the local issuing authority here. And my questions mostly pertain to us as the local issuing authority. In reading these ordinances and dealing with the ordinances that the county has on the books now, I would request that this rulemaking and this change prompt the state to provide us local issuing authorities, at least in the coastal district, a updated model ordinance with the request to adopt, to reflect the changes as they impact us as an issuing authority and our residents here. Secondly, I would like to ask that consideration is placed to extend your exemptions to include the roadway work that goes on. As y'all indicated, a lot of the roads here are in causeway situations close to jurisdictional areas. Definitely the case in our jurisdiction, as an exemption to include that as a means for us to continue to provide safe transit for the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to respond to that and comment up front?
If I understood your question about road maintenance, was that road maintenance is exempt, so new road, not exempt. Road maintenance would be exempt.
My name is Dr. Fred Marlin. I'm a marine scientist, retired, and I have two questions. Second question I will inquire when I get the answer from the first one. How do you carry out a site inspection of the boundary and then the buffer? I mean, you go on someone's property, who goes there, and how does all the, explain to me how that happens.
Dr. Marlin, I'm assuming you're referring to the coastal marshlands protection boundary line, just to clarify? The jurisdictional line as CRD would administer it? Yes, sir? Okay. So the staff, we have two means of doing this statutorily. One is an applicant or a property owner, who has ownership of that property, can submit to us a corrected 5.6 mean tide level elevation survey to determine where that boundary is, or CRD could go out and do a delineation based on the indicators identified in the law, the 14 plants and other indicators, to determine where that interface of upland and marsh is. Once that's done, the applicant or the property owner is required to get it surveyed and submit that survey to CRD for us to verify it. And then I believe it would be that line of record that EPD would use to determine where the 25-foot setback would be.
Of course, I started all that.
Of course.
So
Thank you.
Invented it. But what I'm asking is not you, Carl. I'm asking what EPD does. How does EPD go about carrying out a site inspection, and who does it? And I have proof. I'd like to ask.
And if you have another question after this one, you'll need to wait till others are done.
What I'll do then, well, what I'm saying is, the document, to me, in reading it, needs an editor, big time. It's a very complex, 23 pages of documents, and my suggestion would be that the EPD person go out with Carl's people at the same time and give that property owner a specific answer right there and then. Determine the boundary, and then do the 25 feet, say, on a new construction. Don't let this person keep paying his own money. You guys are getting paid already. Go out there and be a service to the public.
Thank you for your comment. Do you want to respond? Anybody want to respond to that? Or?
I mean, we can certainly go out with CRD. I mean, they're pretty busy. We're pretty busy. I have 96 counties I have to handle. So when we can, we do try to go out at the same time, but they flag the JD line. It is no problem for me to go out a few days afterwards and make the determination. And at this point, now that the buffer is being measured from the JD line, I almost don't have to go out because there's a JD line, therefore there is a buffer. So what? Once there's a JD line, there's a buffer. So there's really no big necessary reason for me to go out there.
We have another question.
You need to meet with the property owner.
Just to follow up to what Shane was saying, and from a CRD perspective, we have, and I would assume would continue to work with EPD representatives or LIA representatives in the case of there's an LIA to try to coordinate to the best ability we can to ensure that our line and the 25-foot area line is all very clear for property owners when they're proposing projects.
Hi, I'm Alice Vick, I'm with EPD, and I want to speak to your question. Once the CRD establishes that 25-foot line, the property owner then has to submit a plan for the work he's going to do. And on the plans, they label the 25-foot buffer. So their architect and their construction person knows where the JD line is, knows where that 25-foot buffer is. And when we do inspections, or the local issuing authority does inspections, then they can verify that they followed the plans they were supposed to do. If they're doing a project that disturbs more than an acre, they have to file a notice of intent. So that's where we capture, I think, the concern you're looking for and communicating with the property owners.
Thank you. Questions?
Hey, Alton Brown with RLC. In regard to variance by rule, my understanding was that as was previously mentioned, the General Assembly said, okay, we're going to establish categories. We're going to limit it at 500 square feet. And similar to maybe a nationwide permit program at the Corps of Engineers, these activities aren't exempt. They require a variance. But if you fall within one of those categories and you meet the conditions of the variance by rule process, then it is pre-approved. And there are a couple of things in there. There's one reference to any application for a variance by rule. I think the terminology there is a little bit confusing because you're really not making an application. You're simply notifying EPD, hey, my project falls within this category. I'm already pre-approved. Provide me with a letter of concurrence within whatever time frame.
Yeah, that's right. The statute didn't provide a lot of detail on the way that program was supposed to function, and so we had to fill in some of the blanks. Agree with you on the application terminology, so we may come up with a different term. The way we have it currently set up, and you know, we're soliciting input on it, right? The way we currently have it set up is there's a demonstration by the person doing the project that I meet the criteria, and EPD, here's enough information for you to confirm or not confirm that it does or doesn't meet that criteria. So there's a submittal to us in order for us to check to make sure that they meet the criteria. Our intent is if they don't meet the criteria, we will let them know they don't meet the criteria. That's where the 14 days comes in. If they do meet the criteria, we don't really intend to do a letter of concurrence. We really just intend for the 14 days to pass, and they're ready to roll. We had a couple of comments here on how good a job we did on establishing that criteria, and so certainly that's something that we're going to have to go back and take a close look at.
Do you have a second question?
Yeah, or just a second comment on the no response within 14 days. That's certainly fine. The less paperwork, the better. I understand that. But just recognize that in other areas of this law, there is mass confusion when it comes to state waters buffers. We have numerous examples of where no notification was provided, you know, just conversations, oh, there's no buffer here or whatnot. Or no, you're okay, you're good to go. And then 6 months later, EPD comes down to a site and is citing an individual with a violation. So I understand the concept behind no notification, but I think for the protection of individuals, some sort of acknowledgement would be better.
Thank you.
Dave Kyler, Center for a Sustainable Coast. There's at least 5 places I've already marked, and that's in quick scanning, where I would suggest there'd be some sort of provision for at least sampling, if not case-by-case verification of the judgment made, such as project will result in restoration or enhancement to improve water quality or aquatic habitat, or it will maintain or improve water quality or aquatic habitat. That's a judgment made at the time of the decision is made, with no verification whether that's true later. So it seems to me, as in many cases of regulation, a good faith effort at the time the decision is made is fine, but unless there's some sort of program for verifying the overall effect, as many of these permits are issued over time, the public has no assurance of adequate protection based upon those good faith decisions.
We covered the Dolphin project. Regarding the power lines and pipelines and such, who decides if they really are for the public good? I have the Palmetto pipeline in mind, which is not for the public good, it's for profit, private profit, and they're they want to go under all the rivers and through the marsh. Who decides whether that's a legitimate project? If they get past the current lawsuit.
Okay, so I'm going to try to answer that without regard to that particular pipeline, because that's not on our topic of discussion for today, and I don't want us to get sidetracked. Yeah, I understand your question though, and I'm gonna do something dangerous. I'm gonna lead in a little bit, and I'm gonna hand it to Glenn and see if he can save the day. So I think what we've got here is we've got land disturbance of a significant project. Right, so you've got land disturbance of a significant project that's going to include stream crossings. And so they're going to have to be covered under our general construction permit, which would include getting variances for those crossings. And now I'm going to hand it to Glenn. There's no determination of public good, right? That is a different statute. That's not what we're talking about here today. That's a different statute and a different issue. It's not the Erosion and Sedimentation Act. There's no assessment of public good. We have criteria for giving variances. Okay, so Glenn, can you kind of wrap that up for me?
As Jack said, so those larger projects that disturb more than an acre of land would be required to be covered under our general construction permit, which would require erosion and sediment control procedures throughout. And also, that would require them to follow the buffer criteria, where there are utility lines that span the marsh and cause a width of disturbance of not more than 50 feet. They would be exempt from these rules.
As Paul just pointed out, my comment was going to be in that same general area of what I've been reading. Almost everything that a simple individual homeowner would be doing, landscaping, a simple dock access walkway is going to require a erosion control plan. And that would be, I think, a severe undue burden on individual homeowners at the very least. It's going to create a workload for the people that have to review these plans. Again, for something as simple as landscaping or a common dock walkway, which is going to be, if it spans the buffer, 150 square feet. So I think that really needs to be looked at. There need to be more exemptions for stuff that's that simple, that's not going to result in erosion.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. We definitely talked about that issue as we're developing the rules. Our current read is that's a statutory requirement. We need to go back and revisit that to make sure we're 100% solid on that interpretation, but that was what our initial thinking was, is that was just a statutory requirement.
If the project does fall under the minor land disturbing guidance, then that project would not have to follow the minimum requirements where that requirement for the plan comes from. And so those projects we recommend you have a plan because you're still subject to the water quality rules. but you're not required to have that plan that's stamped by the professional. So that would cover some of the small projects you're talking about.
That means we're gonna end it now, but here you go.
Yes, one of the persons to my question said that he may not need to go in the field from an EPT standpoint once DNR does the marsh boundary line. The question is not whether you need to go out there. You need to confer with the DNR, but the citizen needs to know when you go out there, you need to walk it with him, talk with him, discuss it, walk in his shoes, and be there with the CRD people.
I go out in the field all the time. I can't go unless someone calls me. I don't know about the site. But if I get a call or one of Carl's people's calls and ask me to go out with them, we're there. We never don't go. So anytime someone calls us for a marsh issue, we are more than happy to go out. I keep copies of the buffer grants applications in the truck. I keep copies of everything that they could ever need. It can walk them straight through everything, give them the telephone numbers in Atlanta who they'll be talking to get the buffer grants. If we miss one, it's because someone hasn't called us and asked us to go out. We do go out and walk them through it.
In a way, this is a follow-up to David Ward's advice about developing criteria for variances. I did a GORA request about 9 months ago, so to find out how much variance activity had been going on in the buffer program around the state, and was somewhat concerned that there have been something like 200 variances per year between 2006 and 2014. Again, I suggest that implies that some sort of monitoring program should be going on to evaluate, if only by sampling, the effects of the activities being conducted under buffer variances when they're on that scale of 200 a year, to be sure that you're on track in how you're controlling those variances.
I'm Steve Wallace, I'm with the Sierra Club. And it's a question, it's about the way you see your responsibility. Even though it's not specifically in the law and you don't have to implement this, it seems like it would be part of your function in your bureaucracy to have some way of keeping track of the effectiveness of this law in accomplishing its objectives. And specifically, over a period of time, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, how will you determine how effective this law's been? If you become responsible to advise the Georgia legislature and how to modify or improve this law over time, what will you base your recommendation on? It seems to me this is just a fundamental responsibility of EPD and CRD to monitor the effectiveness of the legislation that they're implementing.
Elaborate a little bit, feel free. In terms of effectiveness from a water quality standpoint, and I say that because certainly there's some economic tourism, right, enjoyment of the outdoors, right, that's certainly important in everything that we're talking about here today. Those are certainly a little bit harder to put a gauge on. In terms of water quality, though, we assess how well we're doing by whether or not we're meeting water quality standards. And so that's why when Glenn gave the overview in the beginning of the Erosion and Sedimentation Act, he said, there's a connection here between this act and the Water Quality Act, because we want to have water quality that meets water quality standards. And so we don't want to have a lot of sedimentation getting into our waters because it's bad for water quality. So that's Glenn runs a program for non-point source pollution. Right, erosion and sedimentation issues are one source of non-point source pollution, and he's trying to reduce non-point source pollution to improve water quality. And so that's what he does every day as part of his job, and we do see that as very important. And we do look at the success stories. Glenn documents those success stories that can include agricultural runoff from fertilizers or such, or erosion sedimentation issues. But if you give us some written comments, we'll be able to look over those and process them and hopefully be able to respond to them in the next meeting that we have in Savannah. The information there for how to give us those comments are up on the screen. If for some reason you weren't comfortable talking in public and you want to chat with us about any of these issues, we're going to hang out for a while, and so please come up and talk to us. Thank you again, and we're dismissed.